In 1970, Plymouth dealers across America were preparing to receive something unusual. A small British sedan was crossing the Atlantic Ocean, headed for American showrooms. This car was not designed for wide highways or long distances. It was built in Scotland, engineered for narrow European streets, and about to face one of the toughest automotive markets in the world. Chrysler executives believed they had found a quick solution to compete with Ford and Chevrolet in the growing economy car segment. They were wrong. This is the story of the Plymouth Cricket, a vehicle that would become one of the most unreliable compact cars ever sold in the United States. The challenge of the late 1960s. By the late 1960s, the American car market was changing. For decades, American buyers wanted big cars with powerful engines. Size meant success. Power meant prestige. But that thinking was shifting. Gasoline prices were rising slowly. Cities were getting more crowded. A new generation of buyers wanted something different. They wanted smaller cars that were easier to park and cheaper to run. Foreign manufacturers saw this opportunity first. Volkswagen had been selling the Beetle in America since the 1950s. By 1970, Japanese brands like Toyota and Datsun were gaining ground. Their small cars were reliable, fuel-efficient, and affordable. American companies watched their market share shrink. They needed to respond quickly. General Motors was developing the Chevrolet Vega. Ford was working on the Pinto. Both companies planned to launch these subcompact models for 1971. Chrysler, the smallest of Detroit's Big Three, had a problem. They did not have time or money to design a completely new small car from scratch. Building an all-new vehicle takes years and costs millions of dollars. Chrysler needed a shortcut. The solution seemed obvious. In 1967, Chrysler had acquired the Rootes Group, a British car manufacturer that made Hillman, Sunbeam, and Humber vehicles. Rootes had recently developed the Hillman Avenger, a practical four-door family sedan designed for European markets. The Avenger was modern, compact, and already in production. Chrysler executives made a simple decision. They would take the Hillman Avenger, make a few changes to meet American safety rules, slap a Plymouth badge on the front, and sell it in North America. No expensive development. No years of testing. Just rebadge a British car and ship it across the ocean. It sounded like a perfect plan. It was not. The Hillman Avenger becomes American. The Hillman Avenger was introduced in Britain in 1970. It was designed to compete with cars like the Ford Escort and Vauxhall Viva in Europe. The Avenger had clean, simple styling. It was a conventional front-engine, rear-wheel drive sedan built on a 98-inch wheelbase. In Britain, buyers could choose between a basic two-door sedan, a four-door family car, or even a sporty coupe. The engines ranged from a small 1.2-liter four-cylinder to a larger 1.5-liter unit. For the American market, Chrysler made specific choices. Only the four-door sedan would be sold in the United States. The sporty two-door coupe stayed in Europe. American safety regulations required certain features that British cars did not have. Every car needed dual headlights, so all American-bound Avengers received 4 round headlamps up front, borrowed from higher-trim European models. The basic 2-headlight setup would not meet United States standards. Front seats needed integrated headrests, which were added. Side marker lights were installed. The bumpers were reinforced slightly to handle minor impacts. Under the hood, the engine was a 1.5-liter four-cylinder producing 70 horsepower. This engine had its compression ratio lowered to run on American gasoline, which had different octane levels than European fuel. The power output was modest even by economy car standards. The engine connected to either a 4-speed manual transmission or an optional 3-speed automatic. Power went to the rear wheels through a live axle with coil springs and a 4-link setup. The front suspension used MacPherson struts, a common design that provided a decent ride quality. The brakes were actually quite good for an economy car. Disc brakes were fitted to the front wheels, with drums at the rear. Many competitors still use drums on all 4 corners, so this was a genuine advantage. The Cricket also had a unibody structure, which made it lighter and helped with handling. The interior was basic but functional. Front bucket seats with built-in headrests faced a simple dashboard. A large horizontal speedometer dominated the instrument panel. Basic models had minimal gauges, just the essentials. The rear bench seat could accommodate 3 passengers, though it was cramped for adults. Buyers could pay an extra $80 for an interior decor package that added carpeting, nicer upholstery, and a few extra gauges. Without this package, the cabin was truly Spartan. There was no cruise control, no power windows, no power locks. This was transportation in its simplest form. Chrysler named this car the Plymouth Cricket. The name was a playful reference to the insect popular in British culture. It suggested something small, lively, and cheerful. Plymouth even created a cartoon cricket character for some advertising aimed at younger buyers. The car would also be sold in Canada under both Plymouth and Dodge branding. Arrival in America. The first shipment of Plymouth Crickets arrived in the United States on November 20, 1970. That initial batch contained 280 vehicles, all manufactured at the former Rutty's plant in Linwood, Scotland. Every single Cricket sold in North America was built at that Scottish factory and shipped across the Atlantic. Chrysler never produced the Cricket in any American plant. Plymouth dealers received training materials and promotional brochures. The marketing campaign launched with the slogan, "The little car that can." This phrase was meant to evoke determination and capability. Early advertisements showed Crickets navigating city streets and winding country roads. The ads emphasized European engineering, roomy interior space despite the small exterior, and lightweight construction. One brochure described the Cricket as little in size, but big in ideas. The target audience was young buyers and anyone seeking fuel economy and value. The base price was set at approximately $1,915 for the sedan. This positioned the Cricket competitively against the upcoming Vega and Pinto, which would have similar price points. On paper, the Cricket seemed like a reasonable choice. It met all American safety and emissions regulations. It offered seating for 4 or 5 people. It promised good fuel economy. It had European design and engineering heritage. Sales began in early 1971. Plymouth hoped the Cricket would become their entry-level model, attracting first-time buyers who might later move up to larger Plymouth vehicles like the Valiant or Duster. Chrysler's internal projections predicted strong sales. The reality would prove very different. The first year, struggles. By the end of the 1971 model year, Plymouth had sold approximately 27,682 Crickets. That number sounds respectable until you compare it to the competition. Ford sold hundreds of thousands of Pintos in 1971. Chevrolet moved similar numbers of Vegas. The Cricket captured only a tiny fraction of the booming subcompact market. Problems emerged quickly. Automotive journalists tested the Cricket and published their findings. The reviews were mixed at best. Most testers praised the ride quality. The McPherson strut, front suspension absorbed bumps well for such a small, light car. The Cricket felt stable in corners. The short wheelbase and light weight made it easy to maneuver in tight parking spaces. The disc brakes provided confident stopping power, but almost every review criticized the performance. With just 70 horsepower trying to move roughly 2,300 pounds, the Cricket was slow. Acceleration from 0 to 60 miles per hour took over 18 seconds with the manual transmission. That was already sluggish. With the optional automatic transmission, the time increased past 20 seconds. One automotive magazine joked that racing a Cricket was like drag races with 3-toed sloths. If a buyer added air conditioning, which placed extra load on the small engine, performance became even worse. American drivers were not accustomed to such limited power. Even economy cars from Ford and Chevrolet offered more energetic acceleration. Highway merging required careful planning. Passing slower traffic took patience and a long stretch of empty road. The Cricket simply did not fit American driving habits, which involved frequent highway travel at sustained high speeds. More concerning than the lackluster performance were the quality issues. Owners began reporting problems within months of purchase. Some Crickets arrived at dealerships with poor panel fitment. Doors did not align perfectly. Trim pieces rattled. Paint quality was uneven on some examples. These were not catastrophic failures, but they created a negative first impression. Mechanical problems followed. Oil leaks appeared in some engines. Fuel pumps failed unexpectedly. Electrical systems developed mysterious gremlins. Dashboard lights stopped working. Switches became unreliable. These issues were frustrating and damaged the Cricket's reputation. American buyers expected a new car to work properly, especially when spending nearly $2,000. The most serious problem was rust. Crickets began showing corrosion shockingly fast, especially in northern states where road salt was used during winter. Within a year or two, some Crickets developed rust bubbles around wheel arches and along lower door panels. The Scottish-built bodies apparently lacked adequate rust protection for harsh American climates. Owners had to pay for aftermarket rust-proofing treatments to prevent their new cars from rotting away. One automotive historian would later describe the Cricket as damned from the start by slipshod British assembly and poor reliability. That assessment was harsh, but not unfair. The Rootsies factories in Britain had a reputation for inconsistent quality control during this period. British manufacturing in general was struggling with labor disputes, outdated equipment, and quality problems. These issues followed the Cricket across the ocean. Competing against the Dodge Colt, making matters worse for the Cricket, Chrysler dealers also sold the Dodge Colt. The Colt was imported from Mitsubishi in Japan and sold through Dodge dealerships. It was also a small, affordable car aimed at the same buyers as the Cricket. But the Colt had something the Cricket lacked: Japanese build quality. Colt owners reported far fewer problems. The Mitsubishi-built cars were assembled more carefully. They did not develop early rust. Mechanical components were more reliable. The Colt also had more energetic performance despite a similar size and price. Buyers who walked into Chrysler or Dodge dealerships and compared the two cars usually chose the Colt. Why buy a troublesome British import when a better Japanese import sat right next door? This internal competition hurt Cricket sales. Even Chrysler's own dealers struggled to recommend the Cricket when they knew the Colt was a better product. Salespeople quietly steered customers toward the Colt or toward slightly larger Plymouth models like the Valiant. The 1972 updates. For the 1972 model year, Plymouth tried to improve the Cricket. The most significant addition was a station wagon version. This 5-door estate body used the same 98-inch wheelbase but added an extended roof and cargo area. Station wagons were popular in America for family transportation, and Plymouth hoped this variant would boost sales. Chrysler engineers also attempted to address the performance complaints. They slightly raised the compression ratio on the 1.5-liter engine and introduced an optional dual carburetor setup. Plymouth's advertising playfully described this upgrade as adding more chirp or hop to the Cricket's performance. In reality, the improvement was minimal. The engine still produced approximately 70 horsepower by the new net rating system that had been adopted for 1972. The dual carburetors added some responsiveness but did not fundamentally change the Cricket's sluggish character. These updates came too late and did not go far enough. The Cricket's reputation was already damaged. Word of mouth among car buyers is powerful, and the word on the Cricket was negative. Consumer Reports and similar publications warned readers that only those willing to tolerate frequent repairs should consider a Cricket. Such warnings killed sales more effectively than any competitor's advertising. Plymouth dealers found themselves stuck with unsold Crickets. The cars sat on lots while buyers chose Pintos, Vegas, Colts, or even larger Chrysler compacts. Salespeople had difficulty justifying the Cricket when a Plymouth Valiant or Dodge Dart cost only slightly more but offered a larger interior, more powerful 6-cylinder engines, and proven reliability. The Valiant and Dart were traditional American compacts with years of development behind them. They were known quantities. The Cricket was an unknown, and an unreliable one at that. Sales reflected this rejection. In 1972, only approximately 13,882 Crickets were produced. That was less than half the already disappointing 1971 total. The trajectory was clear and alarming. The end arrives quickly. By late 1972, Chrysler executives made a decision. The Cricket experiment had failed. Continuing production made no business sense. The car was not selling. It was damaging Plymouth's reputation. Dealer lots were clogged with unsold inventory. Service departments were frustrated by unfamiliar Hillman components and long waits for parts shipped from England. A final batch of Crickets was assembled for the 1973 model year. In practice, very few 1973 models were actually sold to customers. Most dealer inventory consisted of leftover 1972 models. After 1973, Plymouth quietly removed the Cricket from its lineup. There was no announcement, no farewell marketing campaign. The Cricket simply disappeared from brochures and price lists. One automotive writer later summarized the situation bluntly. The Cricket experiment was squashed after merely 2 years. That was accurate. The Cricket lasted only the 1971, 1972, and 1973 model years, with 1973 being barely a model year at all. Total production for all 3 years combined was somewhere around 45,000 to 50,000 units. For comparison, Plymouth sold more Dusters in a single month than Crickets in 3 years. The aftermath and lessons learned. The failure of the Plymouth Cricket taught Chrysler several important lessons. First, simply rebadging a foreign car and expecting American buyers to accept it was naive. The Cricket was designed for European roads, European driving styles, and European customer expectations. Those factors did not translate to the American market. Second, build quality matters enormously. American buyers in the 1970s were beginning to discover that Japanese cars were built more carefully than American or British cars. The Cricket's quality problems reinforced negative stereotypes about British manufacturing. Chrysler could not afford to sell unreliable cars under the trusted Plymouth brand name. Third, performance matters in America. A car that takes over 18 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour might be acceptable on crowded European city streets, where average speeds are low. On American highways and interstates where speeds regularly exceed 65 miles per hour, such a car is dangerously underpowered. American buyers expected more vigorous acceleration, and Chrysler failed to provide it. Chrysler would continue to import small cars, but they shifted their strategy completely. Instead of relying on their troubled British subsidiary, they partnered with Mitsubishi. The Dodge Colt and Plymouth Champ were both Mitsubishi products, and they proved far more successful than the Cricket. These Japanese imports had the quality and performance that American buyers wanted. In 1978, Chrysler sold its British operations to Peugeot, ending the relationship with the former Rutis Group. The Hillman brand itself would eventually disappear. The Avenger continued to be produced in Europe until 1981, with nearly 750,000 built over its lifetime. In Europe, the Avenger was reasonably successful, but its American cousin, the Plymouth Cricket, was a disaster. Service and parts nightmares. For the unfortunate customers who bought Crickets, ownership often became a frustrating experience. Finding mechanics familiar with the Hillman engine was difficult. Most American repair shops had never seen a Cricket. Diagnostic procedures and maintenance techniques were unfamiliar. Chrysler dealerships could service the cars, but even dealer technicians sometimes struggled. Parts availability was a constant problem. Many components were unique to the Cricket and not shared with any other Plymouth model. When something broke, the replacement part often had to be ordered from England. Shipping took weeks. A simple repair could leave a Cricket owner without transportation for a month or longer. This part situation only worsened after production ended. Once Chrysler stopped importing Crickets, the supply chain dried up quickly. By the mid-1970s, finding parts for a broken Cricket was extremely difficult. Some owners gave up and scrapped their cars rather than wait months for a needed component. The rust problem also shortened the lifespan of many Crickets. Cars that developed severe corrosion became structurally unsound. Repairing rust damage properly is expensive and time-consuming. Many Cricket owners simply traded their cars in or sent them to junkyards, rather than paying for extensive bodywork on a vehicle worth very little. Rarity today. As a result of reliability problems, rust, and parts shortages, very few Plymouth Crickets survive today. Estimates suggest only a few dozen remain roadworthy in North America. Most examples have long since been scrapped. The Cricket never had a large following among collectors, so there was no enthusiast community to preserve them. For collectors today, a Plymouth Cricket is an unusual curiosity. The car represents an interesting footnote in automotive history, but it has limited collector value. A perfectly restored Cricket might attract attention at a car show simply because most people have never seen one, but prices remain low compared to more desirable classics from the same era. The Cricket's rarity is not the rarity of a treasured classic that was carefully preserved. It is the rarity of a failure that almost nobody bothered to save. When a car is unreliable, unpopular, and difficult to maintain, few people feel motivated to keep one running for decades. A footnote in British engineering. The story of the Cricket is also a small chapter in the larger story of British car manufacturing. In the 1950s and 1960s, British cars were popular imports in America. Models like the MG, Triumph, Austin Healey, and Jaguar had devoted followings. British engineering was respected, especially in sports cars. But by the 1970s, British car quality was declining. Labor strikes disrupted production. Outdated factories struggled to compete with modern Japanese plants. Quality control became inconsistent. The British car industry was in crisis. The Plymouth Cricket arrived in America just as British car reliability was becoming a joke among American buyers. British Leyland, the conglomerate that owned many British brands, was notorious for electrical problems, oil leaks, and rust. The Cricket fit perfectly into this negative stereotype. Every Cricket that broke down or rusted prematurely reinforced the idea that British cars were unreliable. This was unfortunate because the basic design of the Hillman Avenger was actually sound. The engineering was conventional but competent. The MacPherson strut suspension worked well. The disc brakes were effective. In European markets, where buyers had lower performance expectations and better access to parts and service, the Avenger sold reasonably well. But building these cars in troubled British factories and shipping them to a demanding American market was a recipe for failure. What could have saved the Cricket? Looking back, could anything have saved the Plymouth Cricket from failure? Several changes might have helped, but they would have required investment and planning that Chrysler was unwilling or unable to provide. Better quality control at the Linwood factory was essential. If Crickets had arrived in America without panel gaps, trim rattles, and early rust, first impressions would have improved. But fixing factory quality issues requires management focus, worker training, and possibly equipment upgrades. The troubled British car industry of the early 1970s was not capable of delivering consistent quality. A more powerful engine was desperately needed. The 1.5-liter four-cylinder with 70 horsepower was simply inadequate for American driving. If Chrysler had developed a larger, more powerful engine option, perhaps a 2.0-liter with 90 to 100 horsepower, the Cricket would have been much more competitive. But developing a new engine costs money and takes time, which Chrysler did not want to spend. Better rust-proofing would have prevented one of the Cricket's most visible failures. If Chrysler had required additional undercoating and cavity protection before shipping cars to America, the rust problems could have been minimized. This would have cost a few dollars per car, but it would have prevented thousands of dollars in damage and customer dissatisfaction. Finally, a stronger parts and service network was critical. Chrysler should have stockpiled common replacement parts in American warehouses before launching the Cricket. Technician training should have been more extensive. Service manuals and diagnostic information should have been thorough and widely distributed. But Chrysler treated the Cricket as a quick, cheap fix rather than a serious long-term product. The support infrastructure never materialized. Even with all these improvements, the Cricket would have faced tough competition. The Pinto and Vega had problems of their own, but they were designed specifically for American buyers. They had more powerful engines, better dealer networks, and familiar American engineering. The Cricket would always have been an outsider. The experimental Cricket. One interesting footnote in Cricket history involves emissions research. In 1973, a red Plymouth Cricket sedan was fitted with an experimental low-emissions engine as part of an Environmental Protection Agency demonstration. This modified Cricket used a Texaco-controlled combustion system designed to reduce pollutants. The car was displayed at technical symposiums with its hood open, showing the experimental engine. This demonstrated that despite its commercial failure, the Cricket was still used for research purposes. The small, lightweight platform made it suitable for testing new emissions technologies. But this single experimental vehicle did nothing to improve the Cricket's terrible reputation among regular buyers. The broader failure of captive imports. The Plymouth Cricket was not the only failed captive import of this era. A captive import is a foreign-built car sold under a domestic brand name. American manufacturers tried this strategy repeatedly during the 1970s and 1980s with mixed results. Some captive imports succeeded. The Dodge Colt from Mitsubishi sold well. The Chevrolet Chevette, based on a global GM platform, was popular. The Ford Fiesta, imported from Germany, found buyers. But many captive imports failed, just like the Cricket. The Pontiac Astray, a rebadged Vega, inherited all of the Vega's quality problems. Various rebadged Isuzus and Suzukis sold poorly. The strategy of slapping an American badge on a foreign car and hoping for success was risky. The successful captive imports had certain advantages. They came from manufacturers with strong quality reputations, like Mitsubishi and Isuzu, in their early years. They received adequate support and marketing. They were designed with some consideration for American needs. The Cricket had none of these advantages. Cricket in popular culture and memory. Unlike some automotive failures that become famous, the Plymouth Cricket left almost no mark on popular culture. It appeared in few movies or television shows. It inspired no songs or books. Car enthusiasts today rarely discuss it except as a trivia question. This obscurity is itself revealing. The Cricket was not a dramatic failure like the Ford Edsel or the DeLorean. It was not a dangerous car that killed people like the Chevrolet Corvair in its original form. It was not revolutionary like the Tucker. The Cricket was simply a mediocre, unreliable car that nobody wanted. It came, it failed, and it was quickly forgotten. For automotive historians, the Cricket serves as a case study in how not to enter a new market segment. Business school professors could use the Cricket story to illustrate the importance of product quality, market research, and adequate support infrastructure. But for most people, the Plymouth Cricket is completely unknown. Former owners occasionally share their Cricket experiences online. These stories usually follow a similar pattern: initial optimism about buying an affordable new car, followed by mounting frustration as problems emerged, and finally relief when the Cricket was traded in or sold. Few people express nostalgia for their Crickets. The car simply was not good enough to inspire warm memories. The engineering that worked, despite its many failures, the Plymouth Cricket did have some genuinely good engineering features. It is worth acknowledging what the car got right, even if those successes were overshadowed by larger problems. The McPherson strut front suspension was well designed. This type of suspension uses fewer parts than traditional double wishbone setups, reducing weight and cost while still providing good ride quality. The Cricket handled bumps and rough pavement better than many competitors. On winding roads, the lightweight and balanced design made the Cricket reasonably fun to drive, as long as you were not in a hurry. The four-wheel disc and drum brake system was genuinely good. Disc brakes provide more consistent stopping power than drums, especially during repeated hard braking. Many economy cars of this era used drum brakes on all four wheels to save money. The Cricket's front discs were a real advantage, even if few buyers noticed or cared. The rear-wheel drive layout with a live axle was conventional but effective. Some later economy cars switched to front-wheel drive to save space and reduce weight, but rear-wheel drive offered better balance and more predictable handling in some situations. The Cricket's rear suspension, with its four-link design and coil springs, worked well for such an inexpensive car. The overall structure was reasonably rigid despite the unibody construction. Unibody cars can suffer from flex and vibration, but the Cricket felt solid on the road. The body did not creak or shake over bumps. These engineering merits existed, but they could not compensate for inadequate power, poor build quality, and terrible rust resistance. A car can have perfect suspension and brakes, but if the engine is too weak and the body rusts away, buyers will not care about the engineering details. Comparing Cricket to Avenger, it is instructive to compare the failure of the Plymouth Cricket in America with the moderate success of the Hillman Avenger in Europe. Both were essentially the same car, yet they had very different fates. In Britain and other European markets, the Avenger sold steadily from 1970 until 1981. Total production reached nearly 750,000 units. The car was available in multiple body styles, including two-door sedans, four-door sedans, station wagons, and sporty coupes. Engine options ranged from economical 1.2-liter units to more powerful 1.6-liter versions. Some high-performance variants even used twin carburetors and tuned engines. European buyers had different expectations than Americans. They were accustomed to smaller engines and less dramatic acceleration. Roads were often narrower and more crowded, so maneuverability mattered more than highway cruising speed. Fuel was expensive, so efficiency was valued. Parts and service for Hillman vehicles were readily available throughout Europe. The Avenger also faced different competition in Europe. It competed against cars like the Ford Escort, Vauxhall Viva, and Morris Marina. These were all similar conventional sedans with comparable performance and features. In this context, the Avenger was competitive. It was not outstanding, but it was adequate. In America, the Cricket faced a completely different situation. American buyers expected more power and faster acceleration. Roads were wider and speeds higher. Fuel was cheap, so efficiency mattered less. The Cricket competed against purpose-designed American subcompacts that better suited local preferences. Parts and service were problematic. The Cricket was a European car dropped into an American market without adequate adaptation. This comparison highlights a fundamental truth. A car that works well in one market may fail completely in another. Success requires understanding local needs and preferences, not just shipping the same product worldwide. The 1% that survived. Of the roughly 45,000 to 50,000 Plymouth Crickets built, perhaps 1% survive today. That would mean approximately 450 to 500 cars still exist somewhere in the world, though far fewer are in running condition. These survivors are scattered across North America, with a handful possibly exported back to Europe or to other countries. Who keeps a Plymouth Cricket today? There are several types of Cricket owners in the modern era. Some are automotive historians or museum curators who preserve the car as an example of 1970s automotive history. These institutional collections value the Cricket precisely because it is rare and represents an interesting failure. Museums often preserve cars that teach lessons, not just cars that were successful. A few enthusiasts enjoy owning obscure, quirky vehicles. For these collectors, the Cricket's unpopularity makes it appealing. They enjoy having something almost nobody else has, even if it is not particularly valuable or desirable. These owners understand they are preserving automotive oddities rather than treasures. Some people inherited a Cricket from a family member and kept it for sentimental reasons despite its low value. Perhaps their grandfather bought one new and somehow kept it running for decades. The car has personal meaning even if it has little monetary worth. Finally, a small number of British car enthusiasts who specialize in Route's group vehicles might seek out a Cricket as part of a broader collection. These collectors focus on Hillman, Sunbeam, and Humber cars, and the American market Cricket is a unique variant. Regardless of why they are preserved, surviving Crickets require dedicated owners. Parts remain difficult to find. Mechanical repairs require creativity and adaptation. Rust damage must be addressed continually. Keeping a Cricket on the road is an act of determination, not an investment strategy. What the Cricket tells us about Chrysler. The Plymouth Cricket story reveals something important about Chrysler Corporation in the early 1970s. The company was struggling financially and strategically. It lacked the resources of larger rivals General Motors and Ford. When faced with the challenge of entering the subcompact market, Chrysler chose the cheapest, fastest option rather than the best option. This pattern repeated throughout Chrysler's history. The company often relied on rebadging, badge engineering, and quick fixes rather than thorough product development. Sometimes this strategy worked, as with the successful K cars of the 1980s that saved the company. Other times it failed badly, as with the Cricket. Chrysler's leadership in 1970 apparently believed that American buyers would not notice or care that the Cricket was a British car with minimal adaptation. This showed a fundamental misunderstanding of the American market. Buyers absolutely noticed the poor performance and build quality. They voted with their wallets by avoiding the Cricket. The contrast with the successful Dodge Colt is telling. The Colt was also a rebadged import, but it came from Mitsubishi, a manufacturer with strong quality control. Chrysler made the right choice in partnering with Mitsubishi. They made the wrong choice in trying to use their troubled British subsidiary for the Cricket. This suggests that Chrysler understood the importance of quality, at least in theory, but the company's financial constraints and time pressures led to poor decisions. The Cricket was rushed to market without adequate preparation. That rush proved costly in terms of reputation and lost sales. In the end, the Plymouth Cricket was the little car that could not. It could not deliver adequate performance. It could not provide reliable service. It could not compete successfully in the American market. It could not survive beyond 3 brief model years. The Cricket story is one of ambition meeting reality and reality winning decisively. For anyone interested in automotive history, business strategy, or the dangers of taking shortcuts, the Plymouth Cricket offers a fascinating case study. It is a reminder that in the automobile business, as in life, there are no simple solutions to complex problems.